Right, everybody, welcome to the Gildre Spotlight podcast. Today we have a very exciting guest, author and founder, Orly Ziwi. But Orly, if you can give our listeners a quick background of yourself, that'd be fantastic.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, Tega. I really appreciate it. And in terms of my background, so I come from a long line of entrepreneurs on my father's side, and both my brother and I are entrepreneurs. So I think it's kind of in our DNA to be entrepreneurs. My first company was Seaweed Design and Marketing Communications, which was focused more on identity, and our niche was really corporate identity at the time. And then my consulting practice, Ziwi Brands, I really started focusing more on brand strategy, and I started that 20 years ago. I'm also a public speaker. I've been on, I think, about 30 podcasts, but I've also done a lot of in-person, pre-pandemic, of course, a lot of in-person. I've spoken at various conferences and what have you. And then I'm also the author of the book Ready Launch Brand, the Lean Marketing Guide for Startups. And that came out in 2021. It was the number one new business book release on Amazon in April of 2021 and was endorsed by Seth Godin.
Wow, that's amazing. I think you have a very interesting and eclectic background because I see you started originally as a professor and then you shifted your way into becoming an entrepreneur. What was the catalyst in that shift?
So actually, I was still teaching a few years ago, but I toyed with the idea. I mean, I've been an educator my whole career as well, but I just, I found that I really like working with startups. Like I said, it's kind of in my DNA and I really enjoy that work. So I actually taught in entrepreneurship programs in the Philadelphia area. But I think when my book came out, that's when I really made that decision to go full in as a brand strategist. And also in the process, I got my MBA so that I could also offer more business help to the founders.
Wow, that's amazing. And, kind of with your career in branding and strategy, have you seen like a significant shift with all this, with this digital age and social media?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's like asking somebody who's turning 100, what was it like before there were airplanes? It's kind
Right,
of like
right,
that.
right.
So, I mean, I'm old enough now that I can tell you there was a time when we didn't have computers. And when the web came on, I still remember people saying, like, this thing is never going to take off. It's funny when you look back with the perspective. But I'm one of those people who've always embraced technology. So once I got over the whole like email, and of course we live on email now, but
Right.
at the time it was like email, who's going to ever want to use email? It's just funny to think back. But I think the biggest shift that's happened is so I started out as a fine artist and then I became a graphic designer. And I did that for, like I said, I had this business for 14 years. And what happened was when everything went to pixels and moved away from the more traditional, more hands-on, printing process. I think we lost a little bit of the magic. And so what happened was all of a sudden somebody who knows nothing about design can have all these fonts and play around, use Canva, but they're using it without any understanding of any of the principles of design or how to actually lay out a page or what communication is all about. And so the thing I have seen, I would say that is the biggest shift I've seen is having these amazing tools in the hands of people who don't actually know how to use them.
Hmm.
That's what I would say. And I speak for designers everywhere who are like, really? Because, it's just, and I'm not saying people shouldn't. The problem is that they think that they're designing and really all they're doing is playing around with tools. And, of course, I mean, nobody would do that with, a scalpel and try to become a surgeon because people would die.
Right, right.
But when it comes to design, what I have found is that without the understanding, and I'll give you a perfect example because I taught this class too. There's no such thing as auto in printing, in design, in fonts. So like when you're putting together a page, and I can give you chapter and verse about what everything means. most people using, they'll pull up a font and they'll play around with it, but they don't know the difference between what size it should be when it's text versus a headline or page numbers. And it's like, so everything is really large. And from a communication standpoint, what I have seen is the legibility has gone way down, and the understanding of what people are trying to say has become really difficult. Which actually, for me, in a way, it's sort of interesting because it kind of led to me focusing on what I do now, which is make fuzzy clear.
I love that. And just curious for those that are dabbling around, because I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs that don't
Oh,
have the
of
traditional
course, yeah.
digital media route or the art route or the graphic design route. But for those who are playing around and messing around with Canva and designs, what's the best step to kind of start making sure that they're utilizing those, methods, those traditional methods that are learned in classes? What's like the first step that someone should do?
Hire a graphic designer and not on Fiverr, like actually ask, hire a professional or, talk to people in marketing and in design and, maybe take a course. Like just the way, like, it's funny because I feel like it's very akin to, just because you have a dictionary doesn't mean you can write a novel. It's the same kind of thing. You have all these tools, but without any of the background of how to use them effectively. If it comes, and then what happens is then we just say, well, I like it. Then you ask 10 other people who know nothing about design and they love it. And then, I come along and I say, wait, well, have you thought about, and they're like, it's fine,
That's, I mean, we kind of relate to that story because when we first launched Gildre, we were just kind of messing around, and then we finally hired
Yeah,
professional designers a couple months ago.
exactly. Yeah. I
Now our
mean,
website looks a lot better and a lot more professional.
there's nothing wrong with playing around with it as long as you understand that that is in fact what you're doing. I think the problem, and I can go back to, at the very beginning of this in the late 90s, when the web came on board, and I mean, I literally put together a course to help people understand the value of design, and I found that, people just they don't because designers and I may get some pushback on this, but designers have not done a great job of really clarifying their value to business. And that was actually the course that I was putting together. And what I find is that, once you understand that, making your font size, 48 when it's text is not a great idea when you're trying to do a PowerPoint, So one of the things that I actually put together is a workshop on, how to avoid death by PowerPoint. And so it's that whole thing of either the text is too tiny or there's too much of it. And some of it is just really, you know, it's not about communication anymore. It's just about playing around with fancy tools. And we have so many, and listen, I love technology. I love all these tools, but just because you have all these bells and whistles doesn't mean you actually have to use them all on one presentation.
Right. And so going into PowerPoints, what's like an ideal structure and how should a PowerPoint look like when you're presenting to a big, audience? What's like the ideal structure for a PowerPoint?
Well, first of all, we're now, it's like dancing to architecture. We're talking about design using words, which, it would be much better if I could actually show you examples of good, not good, or, clear, fuzzy. But the first thing you have to do when you develop a PowerPoint is you actually have to have a story to tell. So the first thing I tell my students, I tell my clients is literally write yourself a story. Like and typically, like let's say if I'm presenting to investors, right?
Hmm.
Typically you've got 5 minutes, so maybe that's 15 slides tops. And what you want to do is you want to make sure you have the structure, which is problem, solution, team, financials. What does the future look like? And it depends on where you want to begin. Like sometimes you want to actually begin with the solution, and sometimes you want to begin with the problem, and you want to use graphics to tell that story. And what I find is really the number one death by PowerPoint is when every slide has all this text in teeny tiny, tiny fonts, right? Like in this teeny tiny text of like, I mean, it's maybe 6 point. and there's so much of it, nobody can read it, or you have five charts when really each slide should be one chart and it should be graphic. So my advice to you would be use graphics whenever possible. So, and that's because our brain processes images 5,000 times faster than it does text.
That makes complete sense. I always heard that the worst presentations are the ones with a lot of text, just because when you're presenting, the audience should really be focusing on the speaker rather than the
Exactly.
presentation. And I've heard the presentation should ultimately be a roadmap,
Yes,
guiding the audience. But have you read the book Made to Stick, by the way?
of course. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So like
Yeah.
the success
Chip
factor, Chip Heath and Heath, yeah,
and what's his brother's
Dan.
name?
I think Dan. I,
Yeah, I love that book. In fact, I used it. I used a lot of when I first getting into this, I read the book.
well, it sounds like even because I think that came out in 2008. It
Yeah, I
sounds
know. It was a long time ago.
you're shaping PowerPoints and all that since you're saying like the early 2000s or
Yeah, early 2000. I mean, I was talking about brand in 2000 when nobody knew what it was.
wow. Yeah. Do you think that social media has really changed how companies position their branding and how actually individuals position their personal brands?
It's so interesting. Again, it's a great question, and social media, it's like kind of a love-hate thing, that most people have. I mean, most of my clients hate social media, and they really try to avoid it. But the reality is, that's our modern town square. So if you're not on it, you're invisible. Nobody knows you exist. So it's you don't have a choice really. The choice that you do have is which platform to be on, and that is really um, that has to do with who you're trying to talk to. So my audience is all on LinkedIn. So there's no reason for me. I'm not going to be on TikTok, which may or may not exist in a few months
I think
in
on the
the US.
19th.
But and I'm not talking to Gen Zers. Otherwise, I'd be on Instagram. And so part of it is also understanding what who each platform is speaking to, because what you want to do is you want to go on the platform where your prospects go. Like it doesn't make sense to be on a platform if the people you're trying to talk to don't go there. So you need to do some research. And then the other thing I would say is, and this I tell my clients this all the time, you don't need to be on 20 platforms. I mean, there's over 100, right? So you really only need one, especially when you're doing it all yourself in the beginning. As you grow as a business and you get big enough that you hire a social media manager, then you can be on maybe three platforms. But it's a mistake to start out trying to be on too many platforms because first it's overwhelming, which then feeds into this I hate social media mindset. And then, of course, you need to post twice a week. So to get the full benefit, that's a minimum of twice a
So
week. Yeah.
is the ideal cadence, it's twice a week? Is there an ideal kind of time frame
Yeah,
that
so I know LinkedIn. So, I usually post Tuesdays and Thursdays, although today I posted, which is unusual for me to post on a Friday, and I usually post around 1 or noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That seems to get the most engagement when I do it then. And then, yeah, and then the other thing you want to do is not just post, but then you want to tag people, although you want to be careful about tagging because if the people you tag don't respond, LinkedIn will actually ding you, like you'll actually lose.
interesting?
Yeah, so you have to be careful. And so what I prefer to do is just to reach out to people individually and say, hey, don't know if you saw this, but thought this would be of interest. And the last thing I would say is never just share the link, always ask permission. Would be happy to send you the link. Let me know if you'd like me to do that. Because that's
Like,
just
right,
respectful.
right. Instead of just pushing like a
Yeah.
calendar link in
And if
someone's
they don't respond, they wouldn't have responded if you had sent it either, right? So then well, this person is not interested in my contact and the content, and you can move on.
Is LinkedIn, how do you keep up with the algorithm changing? It
Yeah.
seems like every quarter it's consistently changing.
Well, I have friends in LinkedIn places, so I can
Okay.
contact them. I think it's also a good idea to have someone that someone you can work with. Like I worked with a LinkedIn coach. I actually did a LinkedIn course. You know, the thing about all this is no one just wakes up one day and knows how to do all this, right? And so I think it's hard to, when people get frustrated, it's because A, they don't have the right information, B, they're on the wrong platform, and C, they're trying to do too much. But the thing I would really caution people not to do is to hire an intern to be your voice on social media. An intern cannot create your voice. All they can do and all they should do is just, constantly feed the engine. But you, the owner, because, since I work with startups, as you know, the owner, the founder is the voice of the brand. And you have to kind of push yourself to do this, right? Um, because otherwise you're just putting stuff out there no one's going to read. And then I hear, well, nobody engages with my posts. Well, yeah, because you're not telling them anything that's of interest to them. So you also, I think, again, the key here is do some research. You have to do your due diligence so that you understand who am I talking to? What do they care about? Engage on other people's posts, connect with influencers in your industry, in your lane, if you will, because that's the way that you're going to get yourself, start to build followers. Yeah,
And with LinkedIn, I think a lot of people like use AI to write their posts.
I know.
What are your thoughts on AI, especially in the creative industry that you're in?
Well, AI can't think for you. And AI, it's like stuff when you put stuff in, stuff comes out. But if the stuff that goes in doesn't make sense, the stuff that comes out doesn't make sense either. I would really caution people not to ask, at least at this point, AI cannot think for you. What I use it for is when I get stuck on a title, or I do a lot of networking. So what I use it for is I copy the chat, I put it and I ask it to clean it up and give me the links, which is awesome. It like does that in a few seconds. That's incredible. In terms of writing, yeah, I think it's where design was 20 years ago. Once it wasn't just the computer, because it took a while for the computer to be able to really provide easy access to all these fonts. And in the very beginning, it was really hard. But now, anybody can download fonts. I'm on a Mac, so it comes with all these fonts, although I spent a lot of years with fonts, so I can recognize some of them. Um, but again, it's like you have to understand the use of these fonts. You have to understand when you're speaking, when you're using your voice, again, AI is not you. And so if you don't kind of prep your AI bot, people are naming them. I forget. I think somebody I know calls hers Kevin or something, like me and Kevin, we're having this convo, and it's like, yeah, that's fine, but you first have to really, it's almost like you have to train AI just like you would train your VA if they were posting for you on social media.
Right, yeah, we like to utilize AI and it basically just accumulates all the data that we've been
Yeah.
putting into it the past year or so. But yeah, it's interesting because I always know that organic content that's from someone that's original gets a lot more engagement on social media on LinkedIn than AI written content. And I think LinkedIn probably, do you know if LinkedIn can understand if a post is written by AI or not?
I think it's starting to. I'm not sure. Some of it is so obvious. And of course, as AI becomes more sophisticated, then the LinkedIn gods, whoever they are, they need to also become more aware and sophisticated. But at this moment, I would say AI has not replaced creatives in the same way and here's the other thing. People understand, and this is, going back to what I was saying about designers, designers, it was always like this magic black box, that designers just sort of magically put something together. The moment the box opened and everybody had access to it, they thought, oh, what do we need a designer for? And that's because, again, unless you make the case and you really, clarify your value, then people don't understand what they're really getting. And so with words, well, I think, everybody knows that, just because you can write doesn't mean you can write a bestseller, right? So for some reason, writing is a little bit different than the design focus, where people think, oh, I've got all these fonts and tools and Canva. I can just, Canva's got all these templates.
Right.
Well, who do you think is putting together the templates? I mean,
Designers.
And what I realize is I just use PowerPoint right now because I kind of got out of all the Illustrator and, all the different software that I used to use when I was doing design. But I think, I mean, my hope is anyway, that people will still appreciate and value what a writer is bringing to the table.
Just going back on branding and design, what are your thoughts on all these companies that are basically simplifying all their designs, if that makes sense? So, for example,
Not sure I understand. Yeah.
like their logos, a lot of companies have been changing their logos to more simple fonts, simple designs. I think Jaguar is like kind of a bad example, but they're trying to modernize their designs too.
Yeah, the problem is they're not using designers to do it. It's like whoever's in their sales department is like, hey, Bob, can you and um, I'll give you this is a really good story about a logo. The Shemaif and Geismar, which was a famous design firm back I mean, they started in the 60s, way before my time as a designer, but they did FedEx and they also did some financial institutions. What was it? I can't remember now which one it was. The thing that's really become important is an M&A activity. The one with the strongest logo wins. And they tried to change one of the logos that they did, and I can't remember who it was for. I'm sorry. I have to
Yeah.
go back a while to figure this one out. And people were so upset about it, they had to bring it back. And so even though they were bought out and merged and what have you, they still kept the original logo because it had so much value. So now it becomes about brand equity, and equity is the value of the brand. And a strong logo actually adds to the value of a brand. And that's especially important when you're looking to either acquire other companies or you're looking to merge or what have you. But people don't understand that. So they think, oh, I'll just simplify. I don't even know what that word means. Because simple, it doesn't
Right.
mean anything to
I
me.
guess I should have used a different, yeah, but have you noticed like a lot of different companies like Apple, Nike, Microsoft, all of their new logos, even Kia, a lot of the car companies are now way different than they were even like five or 6 years ago.
Yeah, but Apple has beautiful logo.
hmm Okay, well, I guess Apple
I would
maybe.
not use them.
I
Like
think
Kia, first of all,
Google's
Kia is a terrible word. I mean, it's a terrible name. You also have to understand that the logo is only as good as the name it represents.
well now their logo looks like a sci-fi.
Yeah, I know. I mean, look, there have been books written about like the worst logos and the best logos. The reality is what a logo should do, it should help me understand something really core about your business. So the thing about Apple, their whole brand was built on the idea of think different. And if you think about their products, it's always, their products are so beautiful and the way they're packaged. I just upgraded my Mac Mini, and I literally I keep the box because it's so beautiful. It's like even the way that the cord is wrapped around this beautiful little circle of paper, and you have to it's like you're unwrapping a gift. That's the difference between Apple and Dell,
hmm
right? And Microsoft too. I mean, Microsoft, what does that word even mean? Whereas Apple has a whole history, right? Newton and the apple and taking a bite out of the apple, and is it about knowledge? And and they purposely, when the two Steves got together, by the way, I actually interned at a studio in New York, and the woman that I was one of the people in the studio
Yeah.
had lived next door to Steve Jobs' family
Wow.
and knew them when they were starting Apple in his garage and turned
That's
down buying stock in Apple in like 1980 or something.
that's
It's
they're probably
crazy.
regretting that a little bit.
Yeah, but would you buy stock from some long-haired kid working out of his garage? I mean,
Right, right.
maybe now you would because we have that whole, we have that kind of
Yeah,
history.
it's now the startup culture is a lot of, kind
Yeah,
of more grungy folks that are showing
laid
up to work
back.
with a jacket and,
Well, it's
well, yeah,
not even about the jacket. I think it was just they were still figuring out what it is they were building, but they knew that what they wanted was to be not like every other computer company. So
hmm
they already started out their so their story. was about being different. That's why Think Different has been their tagline for so long. And of course, it's grammatically incorrect. It should be Think Differently, but it's purposely incorrect because it makes you stop and say, wait a second, that doesn't, right? So it's, and again, like I was saying before, it's about having the right story. So, they're not just about another computer company. And Airbnb is another example like that. You know,
Hmm.
the experiential travelers, they were there, but there was no experience for them. That even that term wasn't even around. And they've been around since 2008. So to this day, their pitch deck is one that's used. I've used it to show my students. I mean, literally, it is
It's
an
super simple,
example.
though. It's very simple.
It's exactly. Now, their simple makes sense. And again, problem, solution. How are
Right.
we going to make money? Here's our projection, right? Here's our competition. You always want to make sure that you've identified, where's your blue space, right? Your open space of where you
Blue
stand
ocean,
out. Yeah. Is it blue sky, ocean? I know that blue sky is about creativity. Blue ocean is about the
new
competitive
opportunities.
landscape. Yeah, right.
Right.
I knew there's two of them, blue sky, blue ocean, but
Right,
yeah,
right.
right.
Montana, we're a big sky country, so
Exactly. So you know exactly. That's funny.
right. Do you see like, for example, like I guess Michael Jordan kind of started creating personal brands, and I've noticed a lot more nowadays. It seems like everybody's starting to, influencers, YouTubers, athletes, every single person wants like their own personal brand. What are your thoughts on that, and how have you seen it kind of shift, and what do you think everyone's gonna kind of have their own personal brand and kind of build off on that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, Michael Jordan is, like a god of basketball. So, I mean, he was such a unique. I don't know if you saw the movie about it, which it was actually quite good. It was called Air, I think.
Yep, I saw that.
It
Yep.
was really fun. Anyway, I think the thing with, you never want to be somebody who's following everyone else who has done the same thing.
Hmm.
So, I would guess that eventually we're going to call it something else because the word personal brand, the words personal, are not going to mean anything. If everyone is a personal
Right,
brand,
right.
right. And it's the same thing with just the word brand. Now everybody uses branding because for some reason it's easier to say, but what they really mean when they say branding is really the identity piece of your brand. So it's the logo, the tagline, the colors, the text, the tagline, and everything to do with how you represent the brand. But brand is the experience. And a personal brand for me is a little bit of a oxymoron because
Interesting.
it's you, right? So you are the person,
Right.
and the brand can't be you. I mean, even the Michael Jordan brand, I mean, it's not Michael Jordan, the person,
Hmm.
it's what he represents. And I think where people get it wrong is they think that it's about them. Because, of course, when you use the word personal, of course you think it's about you. But the reality is, brand is never about you. It's always about what you provide others and what they get, the transformation they get from working with you. So with Michael Jordan, what he did that was so incredible is, it's like the shoe really became almost an inspirational for would-be Michael Jordans. And that's why it was so successful.
Hmm.
And plus, of course, he's Michael Jordan.
Right.
Also, I mean, and influencers are not Michael Jordans. Yes, if you have 30 million followers, and that's, I think that's the other piece of our social media crazed world that we live in. We think that having 30 million followers means that you're someone important or someone that is adding meaning in the world, and that's not necessarily true. And who are these followers? Are they people who are going, why are they following you?
Right.
So there's I mean, this has easily become an existential question for me.
And, I mean, even I've heard like you know, things like social media basically has democratized fame, um,
I
which
have
is
not
another.
heard that. I like that. I like
Yeah,
that. Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, yeah. But going back on your career, so 2021, you wrote Ready Launch Brand,
Well, no, that's when it was
or
published.
when it was published. Okay,
Yeah.
you
I
probably
spent
wrote it.
5 years getting ready to publish it.
Okay, so yeah, tell me a little bit about Ready Launch Brand and what was the reason why you started to become an author with all the different things that you're doing with Professor, your business. Tell me a little.
So, well, first of all, like I said, I come from a long line of entrepreneurs, and my dad was an entrepreneur who was often not successful. And so it really impacted me because when founders fail or flounder, it impacts their families. And I grew up with this idea that, there was a lot of uncertainty about what was going to happen next. And so I think that's really where my passion for startups kind of started. It was like the germ of the idea. And it's funny because I would say that the greatest compliment I ever got was from my dad, who basically said to me, "I wish I'd had your book when I was building my company."
Wow, that's an amazing compliment, and I think,
I know.
yeah,
Yeah, he's
yeah,
got
that's
my book framed, in his apartment. But yeah, I think what I saw was like, this lack of clarity and, sort of going all over the place. And, this idea about making fuzzy clear, for me, it's really become my mantra as well as my tagline. And really, it's the thing that I do. I think of it, that's really my superpower, because I can get people from invisible to memorable in 3 weeks.
that's incredible. But just curious, what are kind of the first things that you will look at when you see a person that's kind of, or a brand that's struggling, and how do you kind of, remodify it?
Well, first they have to be willing to admit that they're struggling because that's not always the case. I mean, I've met a lot of founders who are really dead set on doing it all themselves. I would say for me, that's a huge red flag. If somebody wants to do everything themselves, I would say it's not impossible, but I would say it is nearly impossible to succeed when you, the founder, is wearing all the hats. So that's the first step. The second thing is there has to be a pain point. The pain point is usually when you hit the wall. So maybe for the first couple of years, you're able to somehow, you still can get clients. They may not be your ideal clients. And here's what happens, of course, when you don't clarify who your ideal client is, because the fuzzy to clear is not just about the brand, it's who needs it, who is going to value it, what are they going to get out of it, and what's the transformation. And what I have found is that when people haven't really identified who that ideal client is, then everybody's a client, right? And then what happens is they shift to basically meet the needs of all these different clients, but then what happens, they end up with this hodgepodge and nobody knows what they really do. And so that's the time when they will come to me and say, I'm having a really hard time attracting my ideal clients. So we need to then we break it down and we look and say, okay, well, first of all, do you know who your ideal client is? And sometimes they really don't know. And so that's part of the research phase of this is to really get clear on that client. And then the second part is you have to understand what is their pain point. So
Hmm.
there's your pain point as somebody who can't attract them. And then there's the pain point of your client and the reason why they need you. And you have to be able to align those two things, what you do and what real problem that it solves for a real person. Because otherwise you become a problem looking for a problem instead of being a solution for a well-defined and clear.
Interesting. Do you think that a lot of founders, maybe that you've worked with, start something because they just want to be a founder rather than actually going through a problem that they've experienced personally and wanting to solve that problem?
I've seen all different kinds. I think the most successful founders are the ones who are doing it from either a personal experience or, and I'm thinking of especially founders who have developed healthcare apps that have to do with, in the cancer research or right. It's usually because a family member has gone through it or they've gone through it themselves or they've lost somebody to cancer. And so that becomes kind of a mission because I have actually found that for the most part, founders are very passionate about doing something positive in the world. Those are the people that I like to work with. People who are really they're trying to solve, sometimes it's a big, hairy goal, right? It's like something that's really hard. And the key is not to try to address everything. You address one piece of it that maybe can reduce that problem. Even if it's just by a little bit, it still feels like you're having an impact.
Wow, that's amazing to hear. And Orly, I really appreciate your time. And a lot of our listeners are founders, so that's amazing wisdom and advice for a lot of our founders. Do you have any final words of wisdom or anything you'd like to share to our listeners who are, again, mostly all founders?
Right. I think a couple things. One is be clear on why you're doing it. Make sure you have a lot of money in the bank before you start, because you're not going to see any money for probably 6 months to a year. So, and one of the top three reasons why startups fail is they run out of cash. Not that they don't have clients, but they don't have cash, and that's the difference, right? They run out of money. Even if you could have 10 clients in the hopper, but if you don't have the money right here, it makes it really hard. And then I would also say that don't be afraid to pivot, especially in the beginning, because it doesn't cost you anything to change. And I'll give you, this is one of the stories in my book, is about a bubble wrap. Do you know what bubble wrap was originally intended for?
No, I have
You
no
would
idea.
never guess it in a
Yeah.
million years. It's one of these crazy stories. So it's these two, an inventor and an engineer. One was Swiss, one was American, and it was in the 1950s in the US. And the big boom then was wallpaper. And they decided, they came up with this bubble thing, right? And it was actually pretty ingenious how they put it together. And they thought, what a great idea. This will become wallpaper. We'll do wallpaper with bubble wrap. It was like, and when they sent that out, like when interior designers and when they looked at homeowners, like, no way. I mean, can you imagine a living room covered in wallpaper with three children under the age of 6?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
not going to work. So what they did is instead of giving up, and saying, "Oh well, that's there goes that idea," they looked for a different industry. And they tried a couple different ones. I think one was in agriculture. Anyway, eventually they landed on shipping, because back then people were using newspaper and it was messy and it got everything, dirty, and it became literally, it's like Kleenex now when you say bubble wrap, right? They have a lab. I mean, this is huge. I mean, I multi-million, maybe it's billions now, but it's so funny. So for me, like that's such a great example because they weren't afraid to call their baby ugly. And I would say this is what I would end with. Don't be afraid. If somebody calls your baby ugly, thank them because they've just saved you so much time and money in terms of trying to push something out there that either the market doesn't want, isn't ready for, or is never going to pay for.
And I think those are, fantastic words of advice. Those are great signs as a founder to hear. And I think having thick skin is a
Yeah.
great thing as a founder
And
too.
by the way, it's not easy to hear, just so
Right.
you know. In fact, I have a whole chapter on calling a baby ugly, and that came from one time years ago. I had a prospect, and he said, "You just called my baby ugly, and I don't want to work with you." And the company did not survive, by the way.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not personal. See, this goes back to what you were saying about personal brands. We need to stop thinking about this as about us, somehow repudiation of who we are as a founder. I think the bravest and most successful founders are the ones who are willing to take that and go, yep, I have an ugly baby. I need to do something about it. And then they figure out a way. They find either a different client, a different industry. They shift the way they're approaching it. All of those things, that's resilience, right? Resilience is a big part of being a successful entrepreneur, but you have to be willing to do that. And not everybody is willing to do that. And if you're not, I would say perhaps the life of a founder is not for you.
Well, I really appreciate your time. Those are
Thank you.
fantastic words of advice.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being a fantastic guest on the Gildre Spotlight podcast.
Oh, this was really fun, Tega. Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much, Harley.